Hello, today we're going to be diving into mixing versus mastering. What's the difference? Their similarities and also the differences in mindset between one and the other. So let's get into it. So mixing and mastering are two different processes that are both fundamental to finishing a professional sounding track. Before I continue any further though, each one of these are wormhole topics, so I'm not going to be covering every single detail. I am going to be outlining the processes to give you a solid understanding of why we do each one of these things. So starting off with the big questions, what is mixing? Mixing is the process of adjusting all of your tracks so that everything in your project fits together in an interesting way. For me, the bulk of my mixing comes after the production phase being sort of like sound design, idea generation, and arrangement, but it's also intertwined with those stages as well. And we're essentially switching our thought process from designing and creating sounds to putting sounds together and making them gel cohesively. So now, instead of thinking about a particular sound and how I can make that as good as possible, I'm thinking about multiple sounds, how they're interacting with each other, and how I can get them to work together. So on the contrary then, what is mastering? Mastering happens after the mixing stage, and this is when the fine-tuning, small details, and preparation of our sort of finished product happens. For instance, if someone purchases or downloads your song, what's actually happening is that's a file that's being duplicated, and then someone is downloading that duplicated file. Depending on how many people download your song, your file is getting duplicated potentially thousands and thousands of times. You have one file that's being listened to over and over. So if we think about it like this, it's really important to have a final process to sort of iron out any creases, make sure there's no audio problems, and also we're increasing the volume of our track so that it is loud enough to compete with all of the other songs out there, or just be on the same ballpark as all of the other music out there. All right. So before I go into any more detail, I want to talk about something called the planes of space. Mixing and mastering is where we really start to consider the 3D space of our song. So what this means is that within any song that you listen to, we have 3 planes of space. I like to call them up, down, left, right, and front, back. So up, down is referring to the frequency spectrum. We've got high frequencies at the top, and then we've got all the way through the mid frequencies down to the low frequencies, things like low end, bass. And then we have left, right, which refers to our stereo spectrum. So we have a left channel for our left ear, a right one for our right ear, and then we have mono in the center, and then all of the space between. So we can pan things all the way in between. And because of this, we can also make things sound really wide or really narrow. And then we have our front back plane of space, and this refers to depth in our songs. So when something is really up front, usually it's going to be a main ingredient, a main core element of our track, something like a vocal. If we want to push something back in the mix, we usually turn it down in volume. We might add reverb to it. We might shave off frequencies or add some filtering to it. So we can use audio techniques to push things back in the mix and also bring things forward. And it's the combination of these 3 planes of space in which, when we're mixing, we think about prioritizing or positioning particular elements in our songs within particular areas of those planes of space so that each element has its own space but is also working together cohesively. By the way, if you're just starting out in electronic music, our EDM starter kit is the one for you. It's just a whole bunch of presets and samples to get your feet off the ground in the early stages. So it's free, and the link's in the description if you're interested. If you had no idea what mixing was before you started watching this video, you have most likely already done a whole bunch of mixing related tasks without even knowing it. If you've ever listened to a sound and gone, oh, that's a little bit too loud, I'm just going to bring that down a little bit, this is mixing. This is the fundamental concept called fader balancing. And sure enough, this is actually the first step of our mixing process as well. It's called the fader mix. Now, this can happen during the process. So as you're producing the song, you can be balancing your faders, and you will just naturally be balancing your faders as you do this. This is just something that happens. You know, if it's too loud, you bring it down so it fits with the other elements. But I also personally really like to do this all at once, again, after I've finished the arrangement. So in Ableton, what I'll do is go hit tab and go to the session view. For instance, I've soloed my drums here. They sound like this. And what I'm gonna do is highlight everything in this drum group all the way over here. And I'm gonna bring down the faders down here, all the way down to 0. And now when I hit play, I simply can't hear anything. And now what I'm gonna do is slowly bring things up from quiet to loud. So it's a bit easier to hear how it should be sitting in relation to your other elements when it goes from quiet to loud, as opposed to bringing it from loud to quiet. So let me show you what I mean by this. I know these kick layers here, I've got 2 kick layers and they are sitting at the same level roughly. So I'm gonna bring these up first. And you can see over here we have this peak level in our drums plus hitting around -9 decibels. I know that this is a really safe amount of headroom to start with my kick drum, so that is good. And then I'm gonna start to mix everything else in relation to this. So this clap saturation group, I'm actually gonna bring that all the way up back to 0. And this clap, I'm gonna bring this one in because this is my main clap. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna keep going until it's too loud. So there, it's too loud. I know it's too loud there. I'm gonna take note of where my fader is right now, and then I'm gonna go down until it's too quiet. And then I'm gonna try and find a spot in between those 2 points where it is a nice volume. So I know it's too loud up here, and I know it's too quiet down here. So somewhere around there is sounding pretty good to me. So now I can bring in my clap layer. Now that's sort of just brightening things up a little bit, right? And now we can start to bring in some break and some other things. This track here is like a metallic tone that hits at the same time as the first clap. So let's just try and balance this one as well. That was actually pretty good right there. It's a little bit too quiet, it's a little bit too loud. And I'm just gonna go through all of my drums, and then I'm gonna do the same process with the bass and all the other elements and slowly bring them up and have a good think about my fader levels and try and get everything to work together nicely just by using the volume first. And starting off with a really solid fader mix from the get-go is really gonna help your mix down. So in terms of a 3-step mixing process, the first step would be getting your fader levels right. Step 2 would be removing any unwanted frequencies or artifacts. We do this using our mixing utility tools, things like EQs and compressors. And step 3 of this would be thinking about our planes of space and trying to get everything to fit together, and also just getting creative and having a little bit of fun. So in terms of step 2, removing unwanted frequencies and artifacts, this is the stage in which I would go through every single track and just make sure that there is an EQ on there. If it's a high-end element, I'm removing low-end that I don't need. Like in this case, I don't need all the low end that's down here, so I'm gonna be removing that and just making sure each track is specified to its specific frequency range. So right now we're really thinking about that top-bottom plane of space, the frequency content. So you can see as I click through these, there is an EQ on every single one of these tracks. I'm making sure that each one of these tracks has its own space in the frequency spectrum. And then the last step is just trying to take into account the other planes of space as well. So do I want to pan particular elements to the left or right? Do I want elements to be more wide or more mono? Do I want elements to be forward in the mix or further back in the mix, thinking about that depth as well. And trying to really piece together all of these puzzle pieces so our mix sounds cohesive and our tracks start to make sense with each other. So in mastering, we're working with a printed or exported mixdown. This typically just involves 2 channels or 1 track, 2 channels being the left and the right channel. And we're simply just trying to get it ready for listening. So after exporting our mixed track, our pre-master, if you will, our track should look something like this. If we've built enough headroom into our track, it should be something like this. We don't want something like this because that means it's going to be clipping. So if I was doing this in my own track, then I would simply do it in the same project. But I wanted to show you this because this is all that we're seeing from a mastering engineer's perspective. The biggest change that happens to your track in mastering is bringing the volume of your track up to level. So we want to do this with a limiter device, and that's because a limiter will increase the volume without introducing distortion. But overall, we're just trying to fix up any technical small little problems that might have occurred, polish your track and bring it up to level so that it's ready to be listened to. So the mastering stage is very technical and intricate because of this, but I'm going to give you a very basic and simplified 3-step mastering process that will help you bring your tracks up to level and ready to be shared with your friends so you can get good feedback. So I've jumped back into my Mixdown project because this is what I would be actually doing if I was going to be self-mastering my own music. But if you want to export it out, then that's fine as well. So the first step of this 3-step process, I'm going to click over onto my master track here, and I'm going to go to the Dynamics tab and go get a glue compressor. What this is going to be doing is I'm going to do some real soft compression. Let's actually look down here. There might be so there is actually a few mastering presets here. Let's grab this Catch Peaks preset and put it on there. And I'm going to go through my project and bring down the threshold just to see the needle jumping or pumping just a little bit. Not too much. Sort of in the range of about 0 to 4 decibels is about right. So what this does is it reduces the loudest peaks of our song just a little bit before it goes into the limiter. And so we're essentially just trying to soften our track before it goes into the limiter so it doesn't hit the limiter so hard. If you don't have a limiter, you can use the Ableton built-in limiter here, but I would personally always recommend to get a nice third-party limiter. This FabFilter Pro L limiter does a really good job at increasing the volume without adding any distortion or noticeable distortion, right? I'm going to increase the gain over here, and you'll see that as I bring it up, you can see now that it's reducing the peaks that are going over 0 so it doesn't distort them. So a limiter is the second step of this basic mastering chain. The third and final step here is metering. So this is a free metering plugin. It's called Ulean Loudness Meter. If I have this meter up over here and I hit play on here, so there's a whole bunch of CPU dropouts. That's because I'm recording my screen at the same time. But you can see my integrated and short-term LUFS. What I'm aiming for is around about -9 LUFS. For me, -9 is around about a good ballpark number for punchy dance music without going over the top and flattening out your tracks too much. But this number definitely changes a lot depending on the genre, depending on the streaming service or what you want to do with your music. So I can actually bring down the amount of gain on this limiter a little bit. And so that's hitting around about -9, as you can see there. A professional mastering engineer is going to do a whole bunch of other things. This 3-step process isn't doing mastering justice. There's a whole suite of other things like multiband compression, stereo imaging, and all of these nitty-gritty utility things that are also really important that I don't know much about, but I know mastering engineers are really good at. So just to recap this, mastering is a really technical process, and these are the steps that I take to bring my music up to scratch to share with people. But if I'm to release something officially, then I would personally pay a professional mastering engineer to do this for me. In my opinion, it's always worth the investment as long as your mixdowns are up to scratch. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.